Most of the credit, true credit for breaking the Wetterling case goes to a number of people in law enforcement who just never gave up. And so we had, and they've told me they don't like their names bandied about in public. They're still working, and so we had a private award ceremony for some of them, and I was able to give awards with their families there. One of the last things I did as U.S. Attorney, have that kind of a ceremony, and it was very meaningful because I could look at their children and tell them what dad and mom do for a living and the difference it makes in people's lives. You know, somebody like me gets up there at the press conference and everybody thinks it was my doing, and I played a role, but nothing like the folks who just never would give up. So it begins with testing and retesting DNA. There's DNA on some of the evidence, not from Jacob's abduction, but from Jared Shirels, another person who had been abducted. And with the improvement of DNA evidence, when it was retested while I was U.S. Attorney by the sheriff and the BCA and the FBI, they matched Danny Heinrich. And so it became clear that Danny Heinrich was the person who had molested and tried to abduct Jared Shirel. And since the MO was so much the same, Danny Heinrich became the main suspect. The state authorized a search warrant. State prosecutors executed and authorized a search warrant. The BCA and the local sheriff did at Heinrich's home, thinking that they would find some evidence of Jacob's murder. A lot of people who do this, and there are commonalities, would keep trophies, would keep something. After the search, they didn't find anything that was quite like that, although they remained convinced that Heinrich had done it. And so they called me and asked, because they had found child pornography, everybody wanted to find a way to bring a charge against Heinrich that would cause him to tell us the truth. And, you got to hesitate when you do something like that. We tend to want to use federal criminal law to prosecute people for what they did and not necessarily for other reasons, so it's rare to do that. But I thought long and hard about it, and we decided to bring federal child pornography charges against him for that reason, but also in case he did not confess, and at least get somebody who was considered dangerous for decades off the streets. It was tough because we didn't have the proof that he had abducted Jacob. State prosecutors didn't have the proof that he had abducted Jacob or that he had murdered Jacob. So you're kind of in this other zone where, I've said this publicly to others, I polled all the law enforcement agents working on the case at a particular meeting in Stearns County and asked them if they were convinced. And they all were. And I needed to know that before we went forward with public accusation that he was the person of interest without charging him. It's not something that you do often, and it's challenging, and I tried to do it the right way. But we did it, and then we had to wait. We had to wait to see if this man who'd been silent for decades would finally talk. And I'll never forget, and I don't think anybody will, when we got the word that he wanted to talk. And then we had a mad dash of a week of negotiations and conversations, and what would we be willing to give up, and what would he be willing to give up to get to that point where we would get the truth. And knowing the Wetterling family as I had come to know them, and knowing the sentiment in the state of Minnesota to that need for and that hunger for the truth, we were willing to cut a deal. I've been convinced from day one that it was the right thing to do, and I still believe it was. He's doing the amount of jail time he would have done had he been convicted of murder, and there was no way to convict him of murder, but we got him to literally take us to the place where he buried the body, and we got a detailed confession, including details that could not have been made up, so that we were convinced that he was telling the truth. The last thing the Wetterling family, the last thing anyone in the state of Minnesota needed was another sort of false start. So it was emotional, it was draining, it was difficult. A lot of people had to agree to that deal before we could do it, and there were fits and starts. There were times that I didn't think it was going to work, but we finally got there. And you know, it's hard to talk about the moment when we knew he was the guy, and we knew that we were going to put him behind bars, and we knew that the Wetterling family were going to get the truth. It's hard to talk about it because for everybody involved, it was overwhelming. But everybody did their jobs, and everybody did their jobs well, and the system worked, and the terrible, awful, sad truth, at least, we were able to bring to the family and to the state of Minnesota.